You're listening to Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of women authors of science fiction and fantasy who write about kick-ass heroines. I am your host, Brianna Da Silva, and this is Season 2, Episode 3. Today, we are talking with April Daniels, author of DREADNOUGHT and SOVEREIGN, and we'll be talking about the topic of transgender characters, specifically transgender girls in speculative fiction. Well, let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with April. All right, welcome, April, to Females in Fantasy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
What is the weather like, actually, this afternoon in Portland? You're in Portland, correct?
I am in Portland. The weather this weekend's been pretty mild. It's sort of 70s and sunnies. I kind of like it.
I'm in Colorado at the moment, so I was going to say kind of the same part of the world, I guess. I don't know necessarily. I guess I am sort of far away, but yeah, it's been pretty much the same here. So it's been a pretty nice end of summer. I've been enjoying it. Not too hot. All right, so let's jump in and first tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started getting into writing and all of that.
All right. Well, I guess I first got into writing around the early part of high school, where I started writing fanfic, and also more than fanfic, I was doing a lot of online role playing set in Star Trek universe, but you'd create a fictional officer and you just write their part of the story, and then you round robin with everybody else. And so I did that for a few years. And I really wanted to do, I wanted to go into video games professionally. I wanted to make games.
Okay. Fun.
But I sort of didn't really know the career path. And so I thought, I'll just be a writer. So I went to school for writing. And then while I was doing that, it seemed like, video games looks like a really difficult career path. I think I'll be an author instead. So I started doing that instead, and it seems to have worked out all right.
Yeah, I guess you got lucky there, because I feel like writing is also a pretty difficult career path.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It was not necessarily an informed choice. It was more of this is fun. I'll just do this.
Mm-hmm. It just kind of seemed like a good fit for you, I guess.
Yeah, it was. I think I was a bit optimistic about my chances, but then I got lucky, so it worked out.
Yeah, well, there you go. So that leads us perfectly into the books that you have released, which include DREADNOUGHT and SOVEREIGN. Can you tell us, kind of give us the rundown of what those stories are and what inspired you to write them, things like that?
Well, DREADNOUGHT is the story of a young trans girl who inherits the powers of the greatest superhero in the world, and as part of that, her body changes to match what she wants it to be, but that kind of outs her to everyone else around her. So DREADNOUGHT is really the story of her coming to terms with her transition and her new power. And then SOVEREIGN takes place a few months later and follows her as a professional superhero during a couple weeks that are pretty rough for her.
And was there a moment or something that first sparked the idea for this story, or was it a combination of things?
Yeah. So I was working on a temp contract, and the contract was about to end, and I was just kind of dicking around and decided that it would have been really cool if there was a book for young trans girls that was a really cool, unabashed power fantasy. And then I realized I had the training that I could do that. So I, the next day I was unemployed again. So I just started writing, and I was able to write it in about 6 weeks.
Wow, that's awesome. Fast. And I had to have a moment here to tell you just how much I enjoyed reading DREADNOUGHT myself. It was one of those rare times, because I usually read a lot of books at once. I'm someone that gets bored very easily, so I'm usually I'm not in the mood for this book today, and then I end up starting another one. But I actually flew through DREADNOUGHT fairly quickly, which was kind of a big deal. So that's a lot for me, and bought number 2 immediately, even though I was not supposed to. It was just I definitely recommend it to anyone that's listening. Very just a really good story. Like, I was really connected with the character.
Thank you.
Yeah. But one thing that I thought was interesting, comparing it to actually the last, so you're the second person I've had on that wrote like superhero stories. The first person I had on was CB Lee. And hers is a totally different tone. Her story, or superhero story, is kind of more like a stress-free kind of a thing. Whereas this one gets really, it gets kind of intense sometimes. You have the main character, experiencing a lot of like transphobia and things like that, and there's some abuse that's going on as well. So tell us a little bit about your decision to make this one a little bit less of like the kind of stress-free read and a little bit more of those realities in there. What was your thinking about writing that kind of a story?
Well, I think that there's lots of room for different sorts of stories, obviously. Yeah. I think the reason why I wanted to focus on one that was a little bit more, that had some intense elements to it, was when I was young, I'm suddenly at a loss for words. Basically, I felt like I needed to be able to have it be exciting and as well as empowering. And the only way I knew how to do that was to keep like throwing new curveballs at the characters and keep them unsettled and keep them forcing to adapt. I was trying, especially with Dreadnought, I was trying to create a story where every chapter led really strongly into the next chapter and would keep people wanting to read. And the way that works out when you do that is that it tends to make a story a bit more intense and driving.
Yeah.
So I think that part of that was just the logistics of how I decided to create the story and what my goals were. And that's, I mean, I like I like lower stress stories. I'm just no good at writing them.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the same way, to be honest, actually. And maybe that was part of the reason why I personally found it to be such an engaging story, was because there were so many different kinds of stakes going on, so many different kinds of challenges and struggles that the main character is dealing with, and that also makes the resolution of them that much more satisfying and empowering. Yeah, and I really enjoyed her as a female character. Like, she's one of those kinds that you don't get enough of, in my opinion. There wasn't, not a lot of, there weren't any of the stereotypes that we sometimes get with female superheroes in particular. I feel like, I don't know, just a really, really fun power fantasy on all fronts. There was a quote though I wanted to ask you about a little bit, and I know maybe it's been a little bit since you've written Dreadnoughts. I don't know if you remember this part, but this was after she had her first negative experience with the other superheroes, and she goes, and I'm going to actually read it out of the book. It says, "My cape snaps as I leave again, boosting for altitude. Below me, the lights of the street drop away like candles off a cliff. The rage comes back, hot and thick, and I'm screaming. I'm screaming like I never have before. My voice echoes in the night air, reflects my fury back at me. It is a girl's rage, and it is right. It is necessary." I thought that was really powerful, but I also would love to hear you talk about that a little bit if you want to. Like, what is a girl's rage, and what does that mean?
Well, a big part of the trans experience is dealing with anger. We're often stifled and shut down and sort of. I've been working on this concept of like the opposite of affirmation. Like, all negative feelings eventually, if you're getting the opposite of affirmation, all negative feelings eventually become one. And so when you get treated badly in one respect, you remember or you feel all the other times that you were treated badly, and it sort of just, it kind of piles up on you. And so I guess, being able to embrace yourself and embrace your identity and reject what people were putting on you, and reject the misgendering and a lot of the stuff that comes with being raised male when you're a trans woman. That all leads to anger, but in accepting that anger, you also accept yourself, because you accept that it was wrong that happened. And in that way, some of the times I've felt most myself and most a woman have been when I accepted my right to be angry about the predicaments and the situations I find myself in because of the nature of cisgender society. And so that's, I think, really where that line came from.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because of how feminine anger is often delegitimized in society too. And how there's something so powerful about recognizing that as well and saying that that anger is legitimate. Okay. What would you like to see more of with how transgender characters are portrayed in speculative fiction? Besides the obvious meaning that we need to have more of them, but what are your personal feelings on that?
Well, I like transgender characters that interrogate what it means to be a woman. I think that it's important to also interrogate what it means to be a man. But that seems like a lot of the gender variant media that I saw when I was young was questioning what does it mean to be a man in a way that suggested that being a man was the default desirable state. Or it was about cis gay men reclaiming their identities as masculine people. And I think that that's great. But I want more trans representation that asks questions about female identity and femininity and what those mean and how valuable they are and why they're important. And so that's what I was trying to create. I also like depictions of gender that show that it's not a limiting thing. I like to think of gender as sort of a language, and certain things and certain ideas can be conveyed more efficiently and more easily in some languages than in others, but basically any idea can be communicated in any language. And so basically any activity can be gendered in a certain way by femininity or masculinity or whatever gender orientation somebody chooses to have or chooses to live in, I should say. So I just wanted to see more options for what it meant to be a woman and to be feminine and to be powerful as well.
Do you ever feel that some depictions of trans characters, it's often there's this assumption that in order for if it's a trans woman, in order for their womanhood to be valid, that they have to go to these far extremes of traditional expected femininity, and that we need to also allow for all the different variations of how that can be expressed. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're saying there? No, there's actually an ongoing issue in trans communities where it can be really difficult to be a trans butch lesbian, because on the one hand you want to be gendered properly, on the other hand you kind of like dressing as a dude or wearing certain things that are kind of dudish, or exploring all the lovely shades of butchness that cisgender lesbians can explore. But if you're a trans woman while you do it, you might just get yourself misgendered. And so that's a really difficult tension. And that's sort of one of the things I wanted to explore with Dreadnought. You notice I didn't give her any kind of skirt or feminized superhero outfit. She gets a body glove that covers her from neck to her very thick boots. She does not
worry about chipping nails when she's fighting people, that sort of thing. I wanted her to be somewhat androgynous in presentation when she was doing her superhero things, but undeniably a girl underneath that.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed that about her character, personally. But that's probably in part just because I'm not like a real girly girl anyway. So I always connect with those kind of characters. And a little bit connected to that, some of the things that it was kind of interesting for the character was that when everyone saw her as a girl, she also started experiencing sexism that she had never experienced before. I thought that was kind of interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, that's a common experience for trans women when they transition is discovering all sorts of things that just did not show up on the radar when you're presenting as male. That was kind of my hat tip to a lot of the things that I experienced, a lot of things my friends have experienced. More my friends than me. I don't pass very well. I get harassment, but it's not the sort that people who are accepted as women frequently get. But like I have a lot of friends who they describe those same patterns. So I wanted to make sure they were in there.
Yeah. Okay. I thought it was kind of interesting how and hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler for anyone, but she kind of loses her friendship with like her best friend. He just starts acting like really shitty towards her. And the thing was that he was always that way, but she kind of didn't notice it before. So yeah, very, very interesting. And I love how in doing something like a superhero story, you're able to explore all those shades and all those details. It adds a lot of depth to the story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So is there anything that you can tell us about the third book in this series that is still a work in progress as far as I'm aware?
Yeah, it's still a work in progress. I'm working on it with my editor right now to hopefully get a draft out for release in 2019.
Exciting.
And I'm not sure what I can talk. It continues the story of Danielle as a professional hero. She's dealing with a lot of the fallout from the things that happened in the second book. I've got a lot of things that I'm planning to do. I'm just not sure which ones I can talk about right now. So it's I hope will be very exciting.
Oh, all right. And do you have any other kind of projects on the radar, or is this pretty much your focus at the moment?
Oh, I have a lot of projects. I've been on a couple year-long writer's block because I wrote Dreadnought and Sovereign a while ago, and then we signed the contract to publish them. And then also the world went to hell, and all of those things together have kind of blocked me up. And so that's why I'm working with my editor to get unblocked so that I can get this book out for everybody. So it's the first Dreadnought book I've written in a couple of years, and it feels like, I'm writing it under very different circumstances. So in the meantime, trying to break through that block, I have tried to start several other projects. Like, well, maybe Dreadnought's not coming. Maybe I'll write this other thing. Okay, that's not coming. Maybe I'll write this other thing. So I've got a lot of other projects. It's just, once this book is done, I'm going to actually have to sit down and figure out really where I go next, because I've got a whole bunch of unfinished, really good ideas hanging around, and I just need to figure out which one is the next one to go to.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that about getting blocked with the world going to hell, because I don't know how many authors I've heard say the similar thing. Like, there's throughout 2016 and 17, especially 17, it seems like a lot of writers have been having difficulty writing.
Yeah.
And definitely seems like some of the world events going on have been influencing the way people write too.
No.
Interesting. I had a little bit of a block myself too, but it was complicated for other reasons too.
My first attempt at seriously writing Dreadnought 3 was going to start with a really big crisis that the Legion is setting down, and they're just about to enter the crisis area and try and fight the bad guys, and they hear over the radio that the president's about to address the nation. And I stopped after I wrote that sentence, and I realized that sentence doesn't mean what it used to mean for my entire life, because it used to mean the president's about to address the nation. that like something really important is about to be said. But this motherfucker's never said anything important in his life.
You can say that again. Oh, man. Yeah, this feels like a strange place to end the conversation, but I'm not running out of questions for you. It's okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been awesome to have you.
Thank you for having me.
How can people keep up with you if they want to follow you in your work?
Well, I've got a Patreon where they can find me and support me, and I'm also pretty active on Twitter, for now at least. And I also have a Tumblr at Miss April Daniels.
All right. And I will include links to all those things in the show notes as well, if anyone missed that. All right. Thank you again. And you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
That was my conversation with April. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can find it on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and pretty much all the other apps out there that iTunes populates. If you really want to help the podcast grow, please take a second to rate and review it on iTunes. That really helps a lot. Next time, in 2 weeks, I will be having, drumroll please, Victoria Schwab, also known as V.E. Schwab, on the podcast. She is the one that I was hinting about in the first episode of this season, one that I didn't want to reveal her name yet. But she was the one that was also listener requested. And she and I are going to be talking about masculine girls and why it is not, quote unquote, sexist to write female characters with masculine attributes. This is a topic that I really care about, so I can't wait to share that with you all. Well, until then, this has been the Females in Fantasy podcast. I am Brianna Da Silva. Thanks for listening.